It's Monday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. Labour's promising to set up a national wealth fund to create 650,000 jobs for skilled workers such as plumbers, electricians and engineers.
It means better, well-paid jobs and it means living standards rising. People will be better off with a Labour government.
In the next hour, Reform UK sets out its election promises.
We're unashamedly patriotic and we believe that immigration, the exploding population, should be the major issue in this election.
A clear acceptance from a senior Conservative that they're unlikely to win the election.
It's possible to win the election. Do I accept it's not the most likely outcome? Yes, I accept that. I'm a realist.
The tech giants, are they too powerful and treating us like modern-day serfs? One of our guests thinks they are. Joining us today, Minister for Disabled People, Conservative Mims Davis, Labour peer and former General Secretary of the TUC, Francis O'Grady, former Greek Finance Minister Yanis Varoufakis and author and broadcaster Timandra Harkness. This is Politics Live Election 2024. Welcome to viewers on BBC Two, BBC iPlayer and BBC News. You heard in the headlines the Defence Secretary Grant Shapps saying he's a realist when it comes to the likelihood of the Conservatives winning the election. In an interview with Times Radio, he accepts it's not the most likely outcome. Do you agree, Mims Davis, there's very little chance of your party winning the election?
Well, I think it's about fighting for every vote, getting on every doorstep and chatting to people. And of course, there's a mountain to climb. We've been in power for 15 years. 5 of those with the Lib Dems, so they've had a bit of amnesia on that, you might have noticed. And there's changed boundaries and we're up against it. But Grant's a realist, Conservatives are pragmatists, and we're going to get on and fight very hard for the best outcome we can get for the Prime Minister and our great party. And
are you a realist too?
Well, I was just saying earlier, I love campaigning. So for me...
Thank goodness for that,
Well,
Mims.
Absolutely. Very sore feet. We've been to a lot of pubs and coffee shops because it's been a rather wet campaign, I must
But do you
say.
genuinely think it's going to make any difference to the actual outcome?
Every conversation matters because I think there's lots of, it's chaos, it's hell out there. And then you talk to people and they go, actually, I'm doing all right. I've got my business going. I've got my car going. I've got my roof over my head. And actually, we've been through tough times.
Although they do sound like the sort of basics and fundamentals for most people. Let me just show you.
Take that for granted. We've been through a pandemic, a war. We have got the impact of that on our continent. And other countries are also having tough times.
All right. Well,
and I think you need to remind the voters, whether it's the £400 billion that we've given in the pandemic to help them.
You can save some of the slogans for a little later on in the
Not
programme.
I just want to. Fact.
All right,
that money is taxpayers' money.
Let me just show you this headline in the Times because some of your former colleagues are obviously looking ahead to life under a potential Labour government. Andrea Leadsom, former minister, I'd worked with the Labour government, former Tory MP who ran for leadership, tells Times Radio she's already held talks with Wes Streeting about helping families. That's the Shadow Health Secretary. Do you wish her luck?
I'd be shocked if Andrea wouldn't want to continue any work around the first 1,000 days of babies' lives. It's something she's completely dedicated to. And she's still a government minister, so she's still doing what I have to do is keep things going until a new government is formed.
Does it feel like 1997, Francis?
No, I don't think it does.
So no landslide.
I think one of the concerns about Grant Shapps' statement is that he's trying to encourage a complacency amongst people who are thinking of voting Labour. So Labour's going to have to fight for every vote and not take it for granted. But he's also trying to distract from the fact that this is the first Parliament where families are worse off than they were at the start. And, no amount of sloganising can get over that fact that people have had it up to here with the cost of living crisis, with the psychodrama in the Tory party. and I think we'll probably come on to this later, but a real failure to stand up to reform.
Well, it may be Labour's responsibility too to do exactly that. I think we can show you pictures in a moment of Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, out campaigning with Rachel Reeves. We'll wait for those to come through. I think they're somewhere on the south coast. While we talk to Yanis Varoufakis, watching this election from the outside. Yanis, do you agree we're probably looking at a Labour victory, and perhaps a big Labour victory?
And there's no doubt about that. That's not the interesting part. The interesting part is what happens immediately after that, both on the government side, regarding policies to be actuated and implemented, and also the many nights of very long knives that will follow within the Tory opposition, if it is the official opposition. But allow me to just briefly to say, as an outsider, that I wish this election campaign focused more on the great British conundrum, as I see it. This is a very rich country with poor people, low productivity, low wages, deficits everywhere, budget deficit, trade deficit, deficits galore, in a very rich country. I think you should just be concentrating on this. I hear people talking about wealth creation.
Well, it's Labour. That's the forefront of their campaign.
Yes, but no, with no substance whatsoever. There are so few real differences. But don't be so happy, because the point I'm going to make is that there's so few real differences between the manifesto of the Conservative Party and the Labour Party from a macroeconomic point of view.
Right.
There is no plan for massive green investment, for instance, in this country by anyone.
Right. Well, we're going to look at the economy in more detail in terms of the prospectus being put forward by Labour. Timandra, what do you make broadly of the psychology that Francis was referring to of Grant Shapps, painting the Tories as the underdogs? We've heard Rishi Sunak saying, don't hand Labour a blank cheque. We had on this programme, sitting just where Mims was, Geoffrey Cox, the former Attorney General, don't allow Britain to sleepwalk into a one-party socialist state. Does it work?
Well, I don't know, but it's interesting if you look at the digital campaigning so far. That has been one of the strong messages from the Conservatives from the start. Almost the only consistent, coherent message through the digital platforms, which is obviously the main way the parties campaign these days, is less about, yes, no, come on, we can still win this, and more about just try and limit the size of Labour's majority. And the blank cheque thing obviously has a double meaning of, oh, well, you know, you're handing over your money through taxes, because that's another key part of their campaign. And also there will be no opposition within Parliament.
Effective?
I don't know. It's very hard to tell. I think the discouragement point is quite interesting. The don't bother to turn out and vote because it's all in the bag. There's very little evidence that digital campaigning really sways people in any kind of mysterious, magical way. But the one thing it has been shown to sometimes be effective at is to actually discourage turnout. So not so much the persuading, but the mobilising. You can demobilise people.
Could we just talk very briefly with you, Yanis, about this story, because it has been released today in BBC News. Greek Coast Guard threw migrants overboard to their deaths, witnesses say. Now, this is a BBC analysis that has found over a 3-year period that more than 40 people are alleged to have died as a result of being forced out of Greek territorial waters or taken back out to sea after reaching Greek islands. Now, the Greek Coast Guard has told the BBC investigation it strongly rejects all accusations of illegal activities. What's your reaction to this?
Well, I've raised this issue in Greece's parliament on a number of occasions. We had lots of evidence, some of which the BBC reporters used. I feel ashamed as a Greek citizen, as a European, for what the Greek government, the Greek Coast Guard, and Frontex, the European Union, is doing. These are crimes against large numbers of people that have gone unpunished. We have more than 5,000 cases of illegal pushbacks. But this is Europe, you see. This is what has happened with the rise of the ultra-right. A policy of increasing cruelty to brown people in order to appease a population whose discontent has nothing to do with migration or foreigners. It's got everything to do with 20 years of catastrophic mismanagement of Europe's economy.
Right. I mean, of course, you were part of one of those governments running an economy in Greece. For 5.5 months.
And I resigned
but just
because I was refusing to sign on the dotted line of all the policies.
Fair enough. I just thought I'd remind you that you were there for a brief period. Let's talk about the economy and particularly Labour's promises. Yes, wealth creation is very much at the heart of the campaign. They are channeling, we can see some live pictures here of Keir Starmer on a campaign, I think at a port on the south coast, but they're very much channeling Labour, that slogan you may remember from the 1992 American presidential campaign, "It's the economy, stupid." Now, Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, and her colleague, the Shadow Business Secretary, have been in the city earlier today, sipping orange juice with financiers. Is that the snapshot? Life under a Labour government hanging out in the city, Francis?
I think what Rachel is announcing today is a national wealth fund that for sure will need to build over time, but is acknowledging exactly the point you made, that we've had 14 years of low to zero growth, low productivity, investment going off a cliff, and a cost of living crisis where working people are not getting their
But that just shows how difficult it is. What is a national wealth fund? Describe to me and to our viewers how that would work.
So it's an investment vehicle. The idea is to use every £1 of British government investment to attract in private investment.
How much private investment?
The idea is trying a target of £3 for every pound that the UK government puts in.
Right, but it's not guaranteed, is it, to attract that much private investment?
Well, Rachel is speaking to investors as we speak, and that's what that programme has been all about. There's an expert task force that's going to advise on exactly how it's used. But the plans are clear. It's about creating good green jobs, reindustrialising Britain, and helping the communities that have been completely stuffed by this government and the closures of manufacturing, of traditional industries that we know have to transition to lower energy, carbon neutral jobs. That's what we want. Well-paid jobs, skilled jobs in the areas
everyone wants well-paid jobs and well-paid skilled jobs. It's whether this vehicle will actually work. When Labour is going to stop and scrap any further licences to oil and gas, for example, well, that'll be job losses.
It's precisely because we need to plan and manage that transition with a proper industrial strategy. But look at the Norwegian sovereign wealth fund.
Except that the Norwegians didn't waste their oil and gas for 30 years.
Exactly. So we should have done this decades ago, but we're doing it now.
Hang on, Francis.
And Norway has just taken a major stake in offshore wind farms, a Danish company, which is great. But why can't we do that?
Well, why can't we do that? Sorry, continue your point.
Well, firstly, you create a national wealth fund when you've got wealth to put into it. Britain squandered its wealth from gas from the North Sea over many years. It squandered all the proceeds from privatization. Maybe those monies should have gone in. That's gone. Private funding can be crowded in, as you said, if the public investment goes in. But looking at the Labour Manifesto 2024, there's simply no money there. What you have baked in there is substantial austerity. Look at the IFS, the
Institute for
It's going to have to scale up over time, for sure, and be more ambitious.
But I see nothing in the Labour plans that will create anything other than disinvestment. There is a propaganda talking about it's the economy stupid and wealth creation and so on, and then there are the facts on the ground inside the Labour Manifesto. And I see nothing in there. For instance, they could have cut 5 billion of the super profits of the bankers by tiering the interest rates that the Treasury pays in the context of quantitative easing and quantitative tightening now. Rachel Reeves decided not to antagonize the bankers. So she's happy to put caps on children's benefit, but not on the super profits of the bankers.
Well, Francis,
He's not doing anything about
reality.
capital gains. I mean, why? What is the rationale for having a different rate for capital gains than income tax?
well.
Well, can we just bring it back to reality? Because in Bristol, there's been a green function, some kind of energy company that went bust, that had to get bailed out. Birmingham Council, run by Labour, again went bust, had to get bailed out. Then you've got the same in Croydon. So you've got what Labour say they'll do, and then how they overspend and things go wrong on a local level. And then you look at the blueprint, which is Wales, and saying that, this is the future. And you can see longer waits, more challenges, and certainly not...
But Mims, what's wrong with a national wealth fund?
Well, I mean, I love the idea of it. You've got you've got to clear a lot of the bureaucracy. But if you hear from Labour, they want to cosy back up to the EU. The new.
Well, hang on. We'll part that aside. But
EU.
what's wrong with the sovereign wealth fund? I take Yanis's point that there isn't much wealth around to put in there, but they're pledging £7.3 billion, and they want 3 times as much private investment for every pound of that.
But then they're also arguing the private investment that comes into water companies and rail companies and others. They don't want. So this is...
What investment ever went into water in this country? This is a scandal what your government has been doing for decades. You should be hanging your head in shame as a result. Talking about investment, you have given away your water boards to companies that have defrauded the people of Britain with your political backing, at least now that you're facing an Armageddon in the polls and in the polling stations. Just admit that it was a crime against logic what you've done with water companies.
Mims?
I think you just need to Google The Guardian under the Labour government, and you'll see condoms on the beach and tampons on the beach.
But answer the actual question about what has happened in terms of the public return on water companies.
Well, the reality is, obviously, there's a challenge here, and we know
There's no challenge.
about.
There's just loot.
Let her answer.
They looted the water companies.
Ultimately, the queue for investment, and we've just talked about the Green Wealth Fund or the Sovereign Wealth Fund that Labour may come forward with. Water companies and other people will be in the queue for all of that investment. And ultimately, under us, we are monitoring the water. We know what's going on. We've got the biggest...
the reports of sewage in all of our waterways.
The biggest act of Parliament in the last government has been the Environment Act with the Plan for Water and the monitoring. None of it was done under the Lib Dem Water Minister, and none of it done under the previous government.
All right,
it's right that it's being tackled. No one on this panel would disagree. We have a plan.
Well, before I come to Timandra, answer Yanis's question about what is the rationale for not equalising capital gains tax with income tax?
I have huge sympathy for that argument, because I think the problem in this country is that we've been taxing work and not taxing wealth. And that when it comes to the Conservative Party's unfunded manifesto promises, of course, those tax cuts that they're promising will disproportionately help the wealthy. And that's what they're not being honest about.
Right, but you're still not being clear about capital gains tax. You're sympathetic to it, but it's not. It is or it isn't going to happen during a Labour government.
Well, I think Labour's been very clear on the tax front. What you see is what you get in the manifesto.
All right.
But for myself, I think we have to look in this country. If we're going to tackle poverty and inequality, then, working families should get a fair shot. And at the moment, they're being bashed far harder than the wealthy.
Let me just show you. 17 different taxes still up for grabs to go up, including council tax. And we are the party, and Labour sat on their hands and did not vote.
But of course, as you know, Mims, that the tax burden has gone up to its highest levels under Conservatives.
The help and support has gone up to its highest levels.
The difference between Labour and the Conservatives is that Labour has been clear about the principle. We will not raise the tax burden on ordinary working people.
Yes,
that is
although a lot of your supporters think you should. Let's have a look at this in the Mirror. Pledge to Forgotten Britain, just the job. There is Rachel Reeves laying out this plan to try and regenerate former industrial heartlands, trying to sell this idea of a sovereign wealth fund with £7.3 billion of state investment. Do you think it's the right ambition?
What, to create skilled, high-paid jobs?
Well, via a sovereign wealth fund. As I said, everyone wants those.
I am very struck by, like, when you raise the idea of the Norwegian sovereign funds, they did that by exploiting their oil and gas reserves, and yet we're now proposing to close down the oil and gas reserves.
Not pledging. Well, certainly on the oil and gas licences.
And one of the key things that I keep hearing by people who are trying to run businesses here that fail, especially in things like industry, is that the energy is too expensive here, and that what makes it impossible to make the businesses profitable is that the energy is too expensive. So for me, if you actually wanted to have an industrial strategy and bust the stagnant productivity that we were talking about before, one of the things you need to do is sort out infrastructure and have clean energy and deliver services like a postal service and water and all the things that somehow we can't actually deliver anymore. I personally, I don't really care that much whether it's public or private, but somebody needs to do those things, and most of them are not happening at the moment. So to say, oh, we're going to start a sovereign wealth fund, national whatever, a British wealth fund, and we're going to attract investment, like, well, fine, but if people can't make businesses that are profitable and grow the economy, then what is this money going to go into exactly?
In Wales, no commitment to welfare, no commitment to the nuclear sector there. The community
well, no, but there's been no commitment to the nuclear sector in the rest of the UK either.
This is
20 years ago, Nick Clegg said, what's the point of building it?
This is the clean steel, gigafactories, renewable energies, innovation.
It's how you get there. It's how you get there on delivery.
But you need investment.
And the gigafactories
but we're missing the point on energy.
Go on.
On British energy, we're missing the point. You have one of the, great examples of green energy across Europe. It's not a problem about infrastructure in the United Kingdom. It's not a question of high costs. You have very low costs and you produce massive quantities of wind power. And you do not rely on imported energy. The problem is you have
not as much as some other countries.
No, hang on a second. The point I'm making is this. You have this market fundamentalism which is linking the price that you're paying for your electricity, not to the cost, but to what the private corporation, some of which of course are nationalized French, right, are getting by selling it outside of Britain. So when you create this false quasi-market, you may have kilowatt hours that are produced at minimal cost, and you pay for it as if it has been produced by the most expensive imported LNG. Now that is a design problem. It's a political problem. Some people are making a lot of money out of a very high price-cost margin. So it's not a problem of having too high costs. But you have too high prices, which benefit the owners of these companies.
But what are you going to do about that?
There are big issues about the grid in Britain that does need
there's no
updating
investment
and so on
that, but not on the cost of producing electricity.
It's not just an investment vehicle. It's about potentially having stakes in companies that will.
So you're picking winners. You're going to be picking winners. The state's going to be deciding which sort of investments and companies.
The state already.
We're going to have a proper industrial strategy,
all right. Well,
which we haven't had in this country for so many years.
Let me just pick up on some of the results.
You chose to give it to EDF. Your government, not personally.
I didn't.
Yeah,
but
this state decided to nationalise the privatised electricity generation with the wrong nation.
Can I just pick up on that?
British electricity.
Yeah, well,
that was a decision by your state. It wasn't a market-derived kind of outcome.
Is it, to Mandra's point, do people really care who's providing it? Whether it's private,
they care
whether
about,
it's public?
Yes,
I mean, maybe, yes, some people do.
But in that case... It's not an ideological point. Because if the person who is providing electricity for you has cornered the market with the help of the government and is charging you an arm and a leg for it, yes, you care who is providing.
Right, well, let me show you then when it comes to health, because Labour is proposing more private sector involvement, more outsourcing to get rid of the backlog, they say, obviously, has been built up under the Conservatives, yet partly from the pandemic. Manifesto not the sum total of spending on NHS, says Treaty. Now, this has been seen as an admission that more will be spent on the NHS. Do you admit more will have to be spent on the NHS? First of all, and through using private sector involvement?
What I understand from Wes Streeting is that there is going to be a temporary use of the private sector to clear some of the backlog, some of the waiting lists. I mean, if you know anybody who's been waiting for a hip operation in pain, then it's frankly, they've usually been waiting months.
So you're
if not
relaxed about
years.
private sector involvement?
I think it's, personally, I'm very conscious that it's the NHS we have to invest in. Ultimately, it's the NHS on which our futures rely. And I worry about distracting money from that. But I can also understand, knowing people who are in pain, waiting for operations, why you might want to use any surplus supply in the private sector temporarily.
Right,
in
but
order
that would
to
be
get
something you
those
would welcome.
lists down.
Use the spare capacity, if there is spare capacity in the private sector, to get rid
I
of the
think
backlog.
Wes calls it the independent sector, to avoid the word private sector in there. Look, it's absolutely crucial that we get people the help and support they need, given the backlog and challenges. And I know from my own constituents...
And the Prime Minister admits you haven't done well enough.
Well, from my own constituents, when I was the MP, it was very much improved picture, and thank you to my local NHS who've been doing everything they can to make a difference. But if you want a blueprint of how the NHS is run, just go to Wales.
Yes, I've heard.
But that's part of the United Kingdom. You've got people coming over the border.
You're comparing
to England.
apples and pears. The population of Wales
pain
is
within Wales
on
or
average,
England is not the
older,
same.
poorer, and there is more sickness. It's, you know, again, dealing with post-industrial areas where you've got people who are struggling. So it's unfair to keep bashing.
And I'm just going to interrupt and say there's a full list of candidates standing in your constituency on the BBC website. And while I am doing the public information bit, several important deadlines for the general election are coming up. The deadline to register to vote is midnight tomorrow, the 18th of June. If you want to get a postal vote, you'll need to apply by 5 p.m. on Wednesday this week. And if you need to apply for a proxy vote, the deadline is 5 p.m. next Wednesday, the 26th of June. All important dates for your diary. Now, today, Reform UK is launching what they call Our Contract with You in South Wales. We have Dr David Bull, the deputy co-leader of the party in Westminster. Let's have a little look at this headline in the Telegraph, just before we come to you, David. Election diary, Nigel Farage to launch Reform Manifesto. You're holding this event in South Wales, as I said, where there is a Labour administration in power, as we've been hearing from Mims Davies. Are you now turning your guns on Labour?
Yeah, very much so, yes. We are holding it there because Wales actually gets more money per capita than the rest of the United Kingdom, certainly in England. And
England, not the rest of the United Kingdom.
But let's just look at the situation in Wales. Of course, educational attainment is terrible in Wales. It's at the bottom of the league table when it comes to educational attainment.
And what's your policy? What's your policy on education, David?
So let me just finish. So also the health service is falling apart in Wales, and this is the whole point. That the reason we're going there is because this is a very deprived community. Labour has been in charge for many years, and it just proves how catastrophic it is when Labour is in charge. So, and I'm delighted to show this. This is our contract with you. This is what we're announcing in 20 minutes' time. It's bold. It's radical. We published it in draft form on our website. We've had feedback from the public. We've had feedback from experts, and this is the final version. And we're really pleased with it.
I'm sure you are. You're pledging to increase the minimum income tax threshold from just over 12,500 to 20,000, and raise the higher rate threshold from 50,000 to 70,000, as well as large cuts to stamp duty and inheritance tax. This reminds me of £45 billion of unfunded tax cuts put forward by Liz Truss, and we know what happened to that.
Well, Jo, also, if you read our contract with the people, you'll see the costings, which are in the final pages of this. We've had two former deputy governors of the Bank of England looking at particularly the QE side of it and how much money we think we can save there. The costings are around £140 billion, and we can prove where we get that money. Look,
but hang on, David. Let's just slow down a moment. The cuts will cost a total, we calculate, of £50 billion, and you're going to get this from cutting government waste.
Yes, indeed. So that's part of it.
Where are you going to find £50 billion worth of government waste that hasn't already been found, located and scrapped by the Conservatives?
Are you saying the government machinery is lean and mean? Because I don't think it is. We have to find those savings. We've got an inflated civil service. We've got an inflated government departments. And actually, we're having a conversation with the public here. We are calling this the immigration election. Everything is underpinned by that. 2.5 million people have come here in the last 2 years. Our services can't cope. You know I'm a doctor. We can't see a GP. We've got massive problems in the health service, in education. We can't build enough houses. And that is what people are saying to us on the doorstep.
I know, David,
They
it's
want
very good
change.
to come up. It's very good to come up with the critique of where we are now. I want to look at your supposed solutions to it. You mentioned immigration. Just very briefly, we have Yanis Varoufakis here in the studio. You may have seen the story by BBC Analysis on what happened in Greece over the last 3 years. Is the Reform Party still in favour of pushbacks in the middle of the channel?
We are. So there are two sides to
Really?
this, of course. Yes, absolutely.
Right. Well, let me, just before you answer, just to say that, of course, BBC Analysis has shown that actually that has resulted in Greece's territorial waters in 40 or so people drowning as a result. They deny it, the Greek Coast Guard, but as a result of pushbacks. And that's a policy you want to pursue.
Look, no one should die as a result of having tough border control. The whole point about this is we declare a national security threat. We turn the boats back. We do that in a very humane way, make sure that people get back safely to the country that they came from. But we also, at the same time, we need to open safe and legal routes. We want offshore processing as well. The people who need our help, of course they can come to this country. But at the end of the day, we have to send out a very strong message. You cannot just get on a boat and come to this country. That is not acceptable.
David, on the NHS, Nigel Farage, and in fact we can see the stage to the side of our screens here being set up for him to take to the lectern. He's called for a French-style social insurance system for the NHS, which will replace the free at the point of use model that we have at the moment, with one where you would pay up front and claim back the money later, in other words, like insurance. He argued in the BBC debate that the model by which we fund healthcare is wrong. Do voters understand that's what you're proposing?
That is not actually in our contract because I actually wrote the health policy.
Look, so it's changed.
Nigel,
it's changed.
No, it hasn't changed at all. Look, it's really important that care remains free at the point of need. I think I said this to you before. We spend £176 billion on our health service, 11.7% of GDP. Our outcomes are terrible. 380,000 people didn't start cancer treatment in time.
Yeah,
in
but
the
David, are you proposing a
French-style
insurance system or not?
No, we're not at this stage. What we are saying is the model is broken, that the money needs to follow the patient. I also agree that we need to actually expand the private sector to help to sort out the backlogs. But let me make it really clear as well. We want to actually help people who work in health and social care as well. We want them to pay zero basic
David,
rate
you're galloping
tax.
through all this. I can't actually keep up with everything that you're saying.
Well, that's
so you're
because
not
this is
going
so
to
full of
introduce. You're not going to introduce a French-style social insurance system. You're going to keep the model as it is here.
So the model remains the same, so that the money follows the patient. We think that there is a
Nigel,
role for the private sector.
You better tell Nigel Farage, because he's about to take to the stage to announce a French-style social insurance system.
Nigel made a really good point, which is actually we need to look at the model. It doesn't work, and we need to come up with new solutions. But ultimately, people shouldn't be waiting for treatment.
No, well, I think everyone can agree with that. Just stay with us. Mims, I'm just going to show you the election poll tracker, because, of course, as you know, last week there was one poll that showed that Reform had overtaken the Conservatives. But if we look at the BBC's general election voting intention, what we call the BBC poll tracker, it's 6 points behind, but still only 6 points. It's a party on the rise, isn't it?
Well, I do think the point about reform, we should remind everyone, is not everybody who was a Conservative votes reform. They do have an appeal to a certain voter. So I think, it's certainly something that's been coming up from Labour, that they're hearing this equally on the doorsteps.
But Labour, of course, are 20 points ahead in the polls of you, and that makes them 26 points ahead of Reform.
Look, I can understand the appeal, and David's made some appealing lines there. Some of them may be less attractive than others for some of those voters. But ultimately, they are the Labour enablers. Local voices will be lost in terms of the local community that you can rely on, who have, and I think we've got some real similarities here. We want lower taxes. We want lower immigration. We don't want people dying coming over this
But you haven't delivered. You admit you haven't delivered on those. I mean, David's shaking his head.
It's been very difficult when the Labour Party has been voting against the Rwanda bill in both the Lords. That's been very difficult. Yet apparently Keir Starmer's now keen on managing this. They're part of the changed Labour
Well, they're
line.
interested in offshoring to a third country, not deporting.
Yes.
Can I just come back though on your point about Reform being Labour enablers? That is all you are, isn't it, David Bull? a vote for you is a vote for Labour?
Absolutely not. I mean, look, the Conservatives have had 14 years. They're talking the same great game and deliver absolutely nothing. What I can tell you, you mentioned the YouGov poll. Every single party, apart from the Conservatives, have gone down. They stayed static, and we are rising. We're taking
that was one
votes.
poll.
It is one poll, but we're waiting for the next one. I think the next one's out at 5 o'clock today, but we're waiting for the next polls. But we are also taking votes from Labour. Keir Starmer is not a leader. He doesn't have any passion or drive, and that's what people are telling us on the doorsteps. And remember, I was an MEP in the North West, and these are Brexit-supporting communities, and they want radical change.
Well, right, just before I come... all right, you want to respond, Fros, and then I'll come to Jan.
Because I think reform need to be taken on in terms of their policies. You know, these are Donald Trump fanboys, and I think the cat was let out of the bag, because actually what they don't want is a French-style system. What they want is a US-style system of healthcare with an increase, massive increase in the private sector, and, you know, the NHS becomes dealing with the absolutely most severe cases. That's what you're after.
No, it is
and
not.
when it comes to
No,
£50 billion worth of tax cuts,
why don't you read the
tell us which public services you intend to slash. Be honest with working families and tell us the truth. We had the bus.
Let him answer.
We had
let
the
him answer.
Brexit bus.
Which public services you would have to cut public services or spending on them dramatically,
No,
David, to get your £50 billion worth of government waste, as you call it?
We absolutely wouldn't. Well, if
benefits
actually,
for disabled people.
Well, I suggest you bother to read this before you comment on it. But in terms of the health service, it remains free at the point of need. It remains free at the point of need. The money follows the patient. The role of the private sector is really important, but we also want to incentivise. I, as a doctor, know this. We have to incentivise health and social care staff. We'll do that by giving them tax breaks, and we'll underwrite their tuition fees if they stay in the NHS for 10 years. Well, that's a fair system.
Yanis Varoufakis, you lumped Nigel Farage in with Viktor Orban, Donald Trump, Boris Johnson and Mussolini as anti-establishment voices that help the establishment. Are these populists selling out their voters? It was in an interview you did fairly recently with The Guardian. What is it that binds them all together?
What binds them all together is a combination of telling the people who suffer as a result of 20 years of austerity, we will look after you. And some of them do look after them, like Viktor Orban didn't treble the minimum pension. Mussolini introduced the pension, right? Together with, but at the same time, we demand from you total loyalty, no voice, no trades unions. You will give me all the power that I need in order to be a strong man, and a clear demarcation and a division of society between the wealthy white Christians and the brown people who will be pushed back. By the way, David, what you advocated there is that the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland violates international law on 2 counts. Yes, you did, David, and you're going to hear me out on this. Firstly, pushbacks are against the international law of the sea. If you don't know that, you're a doctor, you're not an international lawyer, check it out. And secondly, by denying people the right to seek asylum and treating them as illegal asylum seekers, you are violating every vestige of international law regarding refugees. But generally speaking, allow me just complete my
sentence. Yeah, but I must let David come
my great fear, you know what my great fear is? That the Tories are going to fade the way they're fading, and that if the Reform Party are smart enough, as smart as Meloni was or Orban was, that you may end up with a Labour Party that frustrates the expectations of the people who voted in, and then you're going to end up with an alliance between a rump of the Tory parties, the worst part, the most misanthropic part, with reform, and therefore you are going to end up with a situation like France today, where Le Pen threatens to take over government in France on behalf of white supremacists.
People in this country are sick and tired of the 2 main parties. They are 2 sides of the same grubby coin. Go anywhere in this country and you will see the response we are receiving is extraordinary. And I'm waiting for increased poll ratings when we get the next poll. And just going back to your point, we are absolutely entitled to turn boats back under the UN Convention of 1951 and again in 1982. We absolutely are. And I made one other point.
No, you're not.
We want to open safe and legal routes for true asylum seekers, and there's nothing wrong with that.
How will you know that they're true asylum seekers if you don't let them come in?
Just briefly, before we move on, Tamandra, listening to this, how much of a threat or an appeal are Reform voters when it comes to Conservatives or Labour thinking, I'm not going to go for the mainstream parties?
Well, I think it's probably right to say that a lot of voters are disillusioned with both the major parties and looking for something different. I mean, for me, I did have a quick look at the draft contract.
Well done.
And I had to take issue with my stats head on with the immigration part, because there's a lot of quotes of immigration figures of numbers coming in rather than net migration figures, so that inflates them somewhat. But leaving that aside, there are some other policies that I think will appeal to people, especially people who are small businesses or lower income families. I can see there are a lot of policies that will appeal. But I have to say, I think the left has to take some responsibility here, because the left has had many years to actually offer working people and low income families something that as a better alternative and some better vision of the future. And the left, as far as I can see, has failed. You look all across Europe, and right-wing parties are coming to power. And what has the left offered ordinary people in Europe for some years? They've offered them green policies, which, as far as ordinary people can see, has tended to lower their standard of living. They've offered them a series of ideological things that, oh no, you should support this and you should support that, and very little tangible improvement in their lives and the lives of their children.
Well, it's time to come back to the Conservatives. We doubled the tax
14 years.
We doubled the tax threshold to 13,000. We're lowering national insurance. We're focusing on self-employed. We're doing the things that if we weren't stuck in a pandemic or in this crisis because of the energy and the war, we would do. And that are our
well
core
before
principles.
the pandemic.
Just read our manifesto, and I find
it definitely was before the pandemic. But Mims, just very briefly, because we've got to let David Bull go. Steve Brine, your colleague, said on this programme that Nigel Farage was a dangerous man, while Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary, has called for him to be welcomed into the Tory fold. Who do you agree with?
Well, I've never met Nigel, but I have...
you must be one of the few people who haven't.
Well, funnily enough, I haven't, and I do frequent quite a few pubs, because they're great in my patch.
Yeah.
But look, our party is one of the most successful, pragmatic...
And would you invite him into the fold? I mean, they're unlikely to win that many seats, despite the poll rating, because of the system that is underway. Would you welcome Nigel?
I think he might be busy trying to find £50 billion worth of cuts to public services.
OK. David Bull, thank you very much. We only have a few minutes left, because, of course, we've gone over time for a change, to talk about techno-feudalism, which I'm now going to ask you to explain in a minute or so. Yanis Varoufakis, what is it?
The moment you enter Amazon.com, you exit capitalism. You actually exit the market. Because think about it. Unlike a shopping mall, where you and I can walk together and look at shops, even if they're monopolized by very few firms, we can have a discussion about it. Say, oh, we don't like this. We can have a consumer boycott if we're peeved by something that we see. The moment you enter Amazon.com, the algorithm belonging to somebody called Jeff Bezos in particular decides who you talk to, matches you to particular sellers through Alexa and various other interfaces. You train it to train you to train it to give you good advice about what to read, about what to buy. Then it wins your confidence, and then the next time it suggests something, you buy it. So it replaces advertisers, marketers. It has a dialectical relationship with you. And then, once it has created this desire in your bosom that you want something, it sells it to you outside the market process and charges 40%, up to 40%, to the capitalist, the traditional capitalist who actually produces it. And that money goes to the Cayman Islands via Ireland, Holland, Luxembourg, and various other...
And you're saying that countries like the UK should tax these companies for every sale they make?
I say a number of things. Firstly, that. We need a digital tax, a cloud tax, I call it. 40 countries have it. This is nothing new, spectacularly radical. But secondly, we need to gain public control of the algorithms.
All right, well, let me get to Tamandra,
because we cannot be regulated.
Tamandra, you'll probably have the rest of the programme, so go for it.
All right, well, I think it's wrong to say that it's replaced capitalism. It's just another form of capitalism. And
very long
for me, it's a very long discussion, and we should have a whole programme to do it.
We should.
Let's shop local, back the high.
Shut up. This is our bit of the programme. Please be quiet. It's capitalism. It's just that it's the rise of the middlemen, and the technological companies are making their money largely through advertising. And to me, this is not a sign of some new dynamic form of capitalism. It's a sign that the capitalism we've got is stagnating. Imagine 2 of the richest companies in the entire world make their money from advertising. They're just skimming off value from what everybody else is doing. And there is, it's advertising and it's platforms on which we do things. And it intermediates between us and everything we do. And sure, that's not a good thing. I mean, we should exchange books, because I've written 2 now as well. But I think to say this is, you know, all the rules of capitalism gone is wrong.
All right, I'm going to let you two continue this conversation, but that's all we have time for today. Let them chat. I'll be back tomorrow with more Politics Live at 12:15 here on BBC Two and the iPlayer.